All right, gang. Had some time here this evening, so I thought we would do movement. Thought we would move on to section 8. And as I was thinking about this, I've been making notes to myself. Section 9. I've been making notes to myself and then using those. Helps me do it a little more efficiently. But then I thought to myself, well, you know what? Anybody that's learning the game is going to be reading a rule book, just like I did. So I thought, you know what, we'll go through the rules and we'll pick out what we need to pick out. Give me 1 second here. Had to finish processing a video. A very interesting one that'll release tomorrow morning. So this is the great campaigns of the great battles of the American Civil War. And we have pretty much gone through the rules, I think all the way through section 8, which was stacking. I think we got through all of that. I know we're probably not covering everything, but I'm trying to pick out the things you need to play and see if I can't help a few of y'all out there. Plus, it's helping me learn some more. All right, so let's talk about movement. There are, in the 2019 Living Rules, there are 3 modes in which you can move. All right. So let's talk about the movement allowances first before we get into that. So an artillery unit. Oh, this is not going to work, is it? Flatten this out a little bit. Got the Newmarket map out here, I think. Yeah, Newmarket. It's not far from me. All right, so you see all that still? Yeah, all right. So artillery, you see the counter there. That 8 on the right side is their movement allowance. All right. So there's artillery. It's the bottom right-hand number is the movement allowance for any unit. Okay. So there's cavalry. That's 9. When they're disrupted, here we go again. Yeah, disrupted. You see, it's a 7, so it gets reduced. In other words, they're not as cohesive afterwards. Infantry, there's some Confederate infantry, that's a 6. All right. And then on their disrupted side, it's a 5. All right, now leaders. Leaders are a different story. So you've got, let's get these 4 leaders out here. All right, we've got Sheridan, who's the overall Army of the Shenandoah. We got, underneath him, we got, one more. We've got Emory, who is a corps commander, all right? And then underneath Emory, we've got Dwight, who's the 1st Division of the 19th Corps commander. And then we got a brigade leader, McMillan, who is underneath Dwight. Okay, so the movement allowance for leaders, they don't have a printed one. So for brigadiers and division leaders, it is 10. So McMillan and Dwight, they are a brigade leader, and a division leader. They have a movement allowance of 10, okay? And on your movement terrain effects charts and stuff like that, just like any other unit, it'll tell you what it costs, how many movement points it costs for that unit type, or in this case, leader type, to move through that type of hex. Corps and army leaders have a movement allowance of 40. However, don't let that fool you, okay? And it will tell you in the rules here that they will lose some of their abilities if they move more than 10 movement points. And we'll get to that when we get into leader movement. All right. So for right now, that number represents the total amount of movement. The number in the lower right-hand corner of the units. Okay. And it's like I say, they have it on the other side too, on their disrupted side. Artillery doesn't change. It's 8 and 8 for that one, at least for that one. All right. So that's simple. Bottom right-hand number on any of the combat units is their movement point allowance. Army, overall commander and Army, and corps leaders have a movement allowance of 40. And division and brigadiers, or brigade leaders, have a movement allowance of 10. All right? Get them out of the way. All right, so let's go through these rules here, all right? Units expend movement points to enter hexes and cross hex sides, moving into adjacent contiguous hexes. In other words, you can't skip from here to that hex over there. It's got to be a contiguous line. We all know that. All gamers know that, okay? You don't have to expend all their movement points. You can, but you don't have to. So if he has a movement point allowance of 8, and you only want to use 5 of them, then use 5 of them. Dismounted cavalry, they use infantry movement costs. And horse artillery uses artillery movement costs. Okay? So keep that in mind. Those are the only 2 oddballs other than those leaders. All right? All right, you got 3 different modes of movement that correspond to the orders that the unit is operating in. What are the orders? March, advance, and attack. Yeah, I know we have open order too, but that's not in this rule set here. All right? Now, there is an exception to this. Units that are out of command at the time that a brigade changed orders continue to use the type of movement corresponding to the brigade's previous order. We discussed that in the orders phase. If you did a change order, or you did an order change during the division order segment, and there was a unit that was out of command, could have been a brigade that was out of command from its division, okay? Or it could have been a regiment that was out of command from its brigade leader, and the brigade got its orders to change from attack to advance. Well, that regiment that was out of command, he would have to stay in attack order. Thus, he would use the movement of a unit in attack order. It's pretty simple, all right? Command, after you go through it a couple times, it actually is. The hardest part about command is when you got, like when I was playing 3 days at Gettysburg, is I can't even imagine. I haven't got to the second day yet. Having masses and masses of units and having to go through and check to make sure everybody. Sometimes you end up doing it when they activate, and then you go look and you're like, oh wow, he's out of command, and you may have to make a correction. But that's the hardest part of it, actually looking at how the ranges and how you see if a unit or a brigade or a division is within command. That's really not that hard. If it was in hexes, it would be even easier. But your command ranges are in movement points. All right, so let's talk about march movement. All right, an activated combat unit under march orders. All right, we're going to talk about that. So let's get a couple guys out here. All right, we're going to take these. We'll take this. Now let's do the... Yeah, we got to use them because we got a leader. All right, so let's do... we'll put these Confederate units in march order because they're smaller. All right, so these 2 regiments here, they're moving up the pike, and they're in march order, and we'll say their leaders with them. This is not going to work. It's going to drive me crazy trying to do this. Might have to get plexiglass out just for this. All right, so we'll put them on the map here. They're in march order, moving up the pike here. Facing the hex side, remember that, okay? And we'll assume they're commanders. There's an 8 strength unit, so we know what's the deal. If it's more than 7 in march order, what do you got to do? You got to extend the column, okay? You got to extend the column. You can only have 7 in there when it's infantry in march order. All right, so we know that these guys, will assume that he's on top of him. So that whole column is in march order. You want to put 1 on every unit, that's fine. That's up to you, okay? So they're in march order, all right? It may move into a hex. It may move into a hex with any type of terrain in march movement, all right? So don't be confused thinking that just because they're in a column, they can't go walking through trees, all right? It may not move adjacent to an enemy unit. So if they're moving up the road and Billy Yank is sitting right here behind this little high ground in an ambush position, all 400 guys, this unit in march order moving up the road cannot move adjacent. He could not move there. That is adjacent, all right? It's not the only thing. There's more to that, all right? It may not move into any hex that is within 4 hexes and within line of sight of an enemy combat unit at any time. All right, so this guy here is hiding behind this hill. We've talked about this. This unit can move. He's not supposed to move within 4 hexes and line of sight. Well, this guy can see the top of this hill, but he can't see over here or any of these hexes. So that unit could actually move there, okay, in march formation. Not here because he could probably see down into there. Now, if this unit were sitting up here on this high ground right here, make sure we can see that stuff. Yeah. So he can see 1, 2, 3. He could see here. That's 4 hexes. So this unit would have to stop right there. That whole chain right behind him would have to stop right there because it's 1, 1, 2. Or I'll do it from there. 1, one, two, three, four. Within 4 hexes of a unit. So if he's sitting here, I guess you count from this unit. 1, 2, 3, 4. So he wouldn't be able to move into there. Probably not there either because he's 2 levels higher. All right, so he would have to stop there. So that's march order. Okay. The movement cost for a unit in march order to using pikes and roads. I don't see any trails on this map. Is half. So it only takes a half a movement point to if you're in march order and you're moving up a pike or a road. Okay. And they are only activated by the march activation marker. Remember, when you have units in march order, they no longer use their division's activation chits. They use the march order activation chit, which I took and put away. All right, but we've been over that. So, all right, so remember, march order is your speedy movement. Okay, you get a benefit for moving along roads or pikes. It's almost like it doubles your movement point. And you're not paying attention to the other terrain as long as you're in that march order on that road, chugging right along. Okay, advanced movement. So we'll get them out of march order. And we're going to say that these units are now in advanced mode. Okay, and we got that 8 right there. We could extend him if we wanted to, but for this one, we're not going to. All right, so now they are in advanced order. They're in a line. They're in a combat line formation. All right, not quite as rigid as being in an attack mode. Okay, it may not voluntarily move adjacent to an enemy combat unit other than artillery. So if this unit is sitting here on the sort of the back end of this high ground, and this unit moves forward, he cannot move in here adjacent to that unit. All right. However, if that unit here was artillery, he could move right up in there adjacent. Now, he's going to get his face filled with shrapnel, but he can move up in there adjacent to that artillery. Of course, also remember, if you move within 3 hexes of cannons, the cannons have the right to fire at you before you do anything else. Now, a unit under advance orders, they may cross a bridge or ford to move adjacent to an enemy combat unit, but it cannot shock on that turn. It has to wait till the next turn, all right, or the next activation. So, great, we don't have one on here, all right? Let's say that is a bridge, okay, or a ford, and this unit's sitting behind it. He's sitting here, overlooking it, and these Confederates are in advance order, and they're coming towards him. And if that were a bridge or a ford, in other words, over a waterway that they could not cross unless there's a bridge or ford, he would be able to move across it adjacent to an enemy unit, but he would not be able to shock combat that unit in this phase. It would have to wait to the next activation. That is the only exception. He can move adjacent to artillery when he's in advance orders, and he can cross a bridge or a ford to move adjacent to an enemy unit, but he may not shock. Let's get that out of the way. Guys, movement is really not that hard either, because if you got all. This is where I go back to saying keeping all your elements, all your units within command, so you're not messing yourself up. A unit in advanced movement may use roads, trails, pikes, bridges, and or fords, which will speed movement. So if you were, see that road in the woods? If you're in advance orders, okay, he's a bad one. Let's use this guy here. He's in advance orders, and we want to go through those woods. Well, I'm not sure. I think it's like 3 or something. Maybe it's 2. So just to move straight through, you figure would be, to go straight through the woods would be 1, 2, and then he's going to go up that slope and do a clear hex. That might be 2 more. Well, what he can do is if he's in advance orders and he abides by march order stacking limits, he can use the road at the advance rate, which is, remember, in march order, it's half on a pike or a road. Well, on a road, and it may be different for different games, but on a road, it's 1. So he wouldn't have to pay that woods cost. It would be 1 to move through there. All right? Simple enough. Now, in attack orders, you're not going to get that. So it does give you the ability to move through there with a little more efficiency and be able to ignore those woods or the bad terrain. Excuse me. And that's covered in section 943, which we'll get over to that before long. All right, attack movement. All right. So when a brigade is in attack orders, all right, they're here. They're in their battle mode here. And they're in attack orders. That means they're ready to get in there and grind. Okay? The movement allowance is halved, rounding up. So right off the bat, you're no longer moving at 6. This is because you got all these troops, maybe they're in a double line formation, and you're trying to keep them, their cohesiveness. You're trying to keep them organized so that they're all working with each other. So those lines or those guys might be shoulder to shoulder, all right? And you're trying to move all of them. So that 6 now becomes a 3, all right? They may not use the road, trails, or pike movement costs. Instead, you use the movement cost of the terrain and the hex. So just imagine that when these guys, anybody's in attack orders, just imagine the map has no roads or trails on it or pikes. You got to use the terrain, all right? Just disregard all those other things, all the roadways. So that hex over here, it would cost him whatever it is to move into the woods. That road, it's like that road wouldn't even be there. All right. It may not use bridges or fords as part of movement. All right. You cannot cross a bridge or a ford in attack orders. And if artillery is attached to the brigade under attack orders, the artillery moves as if it was in advance orders. Okay. We've been over that one too. All right. Artillery always moves as if it was in advance orders unless the command is attached to is in march orders, then it can move as if it was in march orders. Guys, that's movement. That's unit movement. I'm telling you, the section on unit to the basics of movement covering those 3 modes it's not even a quarter of a page. Okay? All right, so let's move on to leader movement. Let's get these guys out the way. And we talked about this a few minutes ago. All right, leaders, their movement allowances are for Army and Corps is 40. For Division and Brigade, it is 10. All right. So, a brigade, division, or artillery leader may move when his command is activated. All right, unless moving with the unit with which he was stacked at the start of the activation, he moves as if he were a separate unit. So, if this brigade or that regiment's sitting here and his leader is stacked with him, okay, he can move with that unit. Or the unit can move and maybe he was behind him. The unit can move and then he can be moved on his own as if he was, his own unit. And of course that you understand that because they might be moving between regiments anyhow. All right. So he can move with the unit he was stacked with, or he can move on his own. Okay. And he moves when his division is activated, when you're executing the orders for his brigade. And the division leader's the same way. Where's he at? So the division leader can move when his division is activated. He can move with the unit he was stacked with, or he can move on his own. Okay. Same philosophy. Corps and Army and overall commanders are a different story, right? Let's see. These leaders do not have their movement. I've already been over that. A brigade, division, or artillery leader may move only once per phase. He must undertake all his movement at one time and may not break up his movement into sections. Okay, so once you start to move that leader, you need to complete his movement. You can't move him 2 hexes, then go move one of your units and then move him some more. It's just like a unit. You got to complete his movement, okay? Leaders always use the best available movement rate for movement and command. So what that's saying is that on a road, your march orders make the road only cost a half movement point. So when you're moving a leader, no matter what he's in, no matter what his organization is in, because your orders are only applied to the combat units. They don't apply to the leaders. So it's as if your leaders are always in like super fast march order. All right. So when you're tracing his command range of 4 and it was down a road, it's almost like being 8 because it's half. Well, his movement, no matter what formation his unit or what order his units are under, him moving on the road would be the same thing. It would only cost him a half a movement point for each road hex. Command and movement. The command range and the movement are the same. They get to use the fastest movement point method. All right. Let's see. A division leader. He moves during the action phase of any one brigade in his division. If he moves with a brigade under march orders, he moves when the march AM is drawn. Really no sense to even talk about that one. So let's say you got a division on the board, all right? And let's say you got this division on the board, or this brigade, all right? All right. That brigade is in, where's that? That brigade is in march orders, all right? They're not right here. You got to have your extended markers, all right? And let's say his other brigade is sitting right here, and they're in line. They're ready to fight. These are both his brigades, okay? And they're right here. They're already in their battle line, okay? So if he's going to move with a brigade that's under march orders, he can only move when the AM chit. So these guys here, they can only move when the march activation chit is drawn. So if you're going to have him move with them instead of them, he can only move when that march activation chit is drawn. I hope it's a little odd, but so if he's sitting over here with this unit, okay, he's sitting here behind this brigade, and you want to move him with that division, all right, which that doesn't make sense because he'd probably be, and you'll see this when you bring in reinforcements. Let's say he's with this regiment, they just came on as reinforcements, and he's going to continue to move with them. Well, he can't move until the march activation chit is drawn. All right, but if this brigade just came on as reinforcements, and he was up here with this unit, and maybe he had some more of his brigades out here, you could move him with the activation of the division. All right, and then he can just do his regular movement, just like a brigade leader. That sounds confusing, but if you read the rule in 931, it's really not. It's just giving you an option that if he's with them and he wants to move with them, then they get activated with the march activation chit. That's when he moves with them. Other than that, you just have him move with his other units if he wants to. But it's one or the other. You can't do both. Here we go. Here's the tricky one. Corps and overall commanders may only move in the commander movement phase, and that's toward the end of each game turn. All right. If a corps commander uses more than 10 of his allowed 40 movement points, his command range gets reduced to 0. So only the leaders that are stacked with him would be in command. All right. So if Emery came on over here and you moved him all the way up here to Dwight, and it cost 31 movement points to get there, all right? Dwight is okay because he's with him, he's within command range. But let's say he stopped right here and he's got a command range of 8, but you moved him 32 movement points, Dwight is out of command from him because he used too many movement points. Now let's say he moved from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right? He only used 9 movement points. So Dwight will be in command because he didn't over move. All right? Pretty simple. 10 movement points or less, you don't have to think about anything. More than 10 movement points, he can only command leaders that are stacked with him. Now, granted, that would mean, so if Dwight was here as a division commander and they were stacked together, Dwight's range to his brigade commanders would be fine. But Dwight would have had to have been with Emery underneath him in the same hex. All right, if an OC, an overall commander, uses more than 10 of his allowed 40 movement points, he may not use his initiative rating for any purpose. So Sheridan's initiative rating of 2 would go out the door. It would serve no purpose. All right? All right, brigade and division leader movement allowances. Leaders may move adjacent to enemy unit, may not move adjacent to enemy units unless they are stacking with friendly units or In the case of brigade, division, or artillery leaders, they are moving with the unit of their command. So, where's my Johnny Rebs? All right, so Johnny Rebs sitting here in this unit. Where's his brigade leader? No, there he is. All right, so if this brigade moves up here next to him, and then the leader wants to move up in there, he can. Or, if he is with the brigade, before they move, he can move with the brigade, okay? But he cannot move up in here by himself without a friendly combat unit there, right? That's like, you might as well just carry a white flag and surrender, right? But I'm not going to beat up terrain. Use your terrain chart. Understand when you can move on pikes and roads at a faster rate. Understand when you can use a bridge or a ford, all right? You get benefits for that stuff. The whole Great Battle system uses an elevated gradient system. So, you know, lighter up to darker, which is funny. I'm a GIS guy that does maps for my local government, and the higher points are always the lighter color. But I notice with wargaming maps, it's just the opposite, which I guess I don't know. I guess it would work either way, because one of them's going to stand out more than the other. But see, if just in general, when I look at a map, that dark area tells me that that's like a pit. That's lower ground in my natural world. So, because the lighter colors mean you're closer to the sun, right? For all you tree huggers out there. Let's see. You do have some steep, though, changes like these things here. And you got to look at the terrain chart. There's the little fingers there, all right? Look at your terrain charts to see how that is. And then, like, see, some of these have there's like a 3 elevation level change right here. See the little lines? All right? Going from that light color to a medium to a tan and to a darker tan. So that could be a real steep climb right there. Look at your terrain keys for each game you play, and you'll get that. There are certain terrain effects, certain terrain types that carry a disorder unit. If a unit enters or crosses a terrain with a capital D, all right, rating, and you'll see that on your chart, on your terrain effects chart, all right, that unit is automatically disordered the instant it enters or crosses that hex or hex side, okay? And remember the reduced movement allowance of a disordered unit, all right? If a unit enters or crosses a terrain with a small dr, the unit undergoes a UDD the instant it enters or crosses the hex or the hex side. If the roll is higher than its cohesion rating, the unit is disordered, okay? If you're using a pike, road, or trail movement, you don't have to check those, all right? Those have no effect. The pikes, pike roads and trails eliminate that happen. So, so right there, I think that's probably a D or a DR type of hex because of those fingers. But if you were using the road, you would ignore those. There are some where you're going to see that in. Going through woods can scatter a unit. Like I said, you got to look at the chart. You'll know by looking at your terrain effects chart. All right, enemy units in movement, 9.5. Let's see. Friendly units may never enter a hex containing an enemy combat unit. So, this guy here, you never enter the hex, okay? Not like the old terrible swift sword where you used to melee in there and you'd get that engaged result where you could keep fighting and just stack them all together and you put an engaged marker on top. Not in this game. Not in this series. You don't do that. All right. Only units under attack orders may move adjacent to an enemy or cavalry combat unit, unless, again, crossing a bridge or a ford, and units under advance orders may move adjacent to artillery. Exception: if the hex side between the non-phasing and the phasing unit is uncrossable, this prohibition does not apply. So, I'm not even sure how that would. I mean, you could be adjacent to a unit, but the hex side between you all is nobody can cross it. I'm not even sure why that's in there. Well, a river. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, okay, so yeah, I guess. So a river would sort of null and voids that, right? A combat unit must cease movement for the phase when it moves adjacent to an enemy combat unit, even if they are separated by what would be impossible terrain. Because it ceases movement upon moving adjacent, it may not change facing after entering that hex. Interesting. So, if you're moving, say like this, okay, which you probably wouldn't, and you moved into this hex, all right, and you had your facing like that, you don't get that one vertex change because you moved adjacent to it. So whatever facing you're in when you move into that adjacent hex, that's the way you remain, all right? Because the rule says movement ends when you enter an enemy zone of control. Facing is a movement, okay? Although I do remember the one hex thing, they said that's not considered movement, but this counterbalances that, or counteracts that, I should say. Let's see. Oh, exception. If in moving adjacent to the enemy, the moving unit stacks with another unit. Oh, okay. So if this unit were going to move in and stack with that one, and he was facing this way, and he was going to move in there, and of course he'll go underneath, he would have to change facing to match that unit. All right. So that would be the exception to that rule. You always assume the facing of the unit that is in the hex to start with. All right. A unit that starts an activation phase adjacent to an enemy unit may change facing by only one vertex and move away, or change facing by 2 or 3 vertices and not move away. Whoa. Okay. So this guy here. Gosh darn it. All right. So he is in this guy's hex. We'll say Johnny Reb. All right. So Johnny Reb's division gets activated. He can move. He can change his facing one vertex. So let's say he was faced that way. He'd be shooting at his flank, and he wanted to stop that. He would be able to freely move, change his facing one vertex. Okay. And he could move away. So let's say he was like this, and he did not want to be there. Okay. So he could change his vertex to this one, and then he could move away. All right. All right, but let's say Johnny Reb was sitting here. He got his ass into him. All right. He can change 2 or 3 vertexes and not move away. So he could turn 1, 2, 3 all the way around, but he can't leave the hex. He's got to stay right there. All right. That's actually, I did not know that. It's actually a rule I did not know. And that is just past the exception under 9.53. All right, so a unit that starts an activation phase adjacent to an enemy unit may change facing by only one vertex and move away. Adjacent to or an enemy can change facing by may move directly to another hex that is adjacent to the same or another enemy unit, whereupon it ceases movement. Okay, so let's say he's there. These 2 Union guys are in line. And Johnny Reb started his activation phase. That's how he was sitting. He could move right there. Right across. Why you do that, I don't know. But he could move right across the face of that enemy unit into another unit adjacent. All right? Or into the, same adjacent hex as them. That is awful odd. But I guess that happened. Units probably shifting their facing and doing that as on the fly, right? All right, withdrawal movement. Here's one of my favorite rules. So let's go. Let's go with withdrawal movement. All right, so Johnny Reb's little 4 sitting right there, and Billy Yank with that big 8 sitting right there. All right. Units that are under advance or attack orders only. They may use withdrawal movement as their movement for that activation. Units that are extended, they cannot use withdrawal movement. All right, simple, easy. That rule said and done with. All right, units using withdrawal movement may not fire. All right, they can receive withdrawal fire from the units that are in their frontal hexes. All right, when using withdrawal movement, a unit may move backwards no facing change, a maximum of 2 hexes. So that means he could back up, all right, in his rear hexes that way or this way, and he can go 2 hexes. So he could go 1, 2, and he keeps his facing. Okay, all right. Now, when using withdrawal movement, oh, we did it. However, if any hex into which the unit wishes to withdraw would cost more than 1 movement point to enter, the unit undergoes a UDD as it enters each hex, earning a +1 die roll modifier for each movement point in excess of the 1 per hex required to enter. So, let's put ourselves in a situation here. All right, Johnny Reb's sitting right there. Billy Yank is sitting here. Well, it really doesn't even matter where he's sitting. It doesn't matter that Billy Yank's sitting there. Other than Billy Yank, if he's in his frontal hex and he does withdrawal fire, he'll be able to shoot at him. But okay, we'll eliminate that for right now. We just want him to back up and not change his facing. Right? Excuse me. So, if he were here in the clear, it would be 1, 2. Clear terrain is only 1 movement point. That's no big deal. But let's say he wanted to back up into these woods. Well, that's more than 1 movement point. Like I said, I think the woods might be different for different games. But let's say it costs 3 to move into those woods. So he can move 2 hexes. But if he goes in there and that's the first hex he backs up into, and that woods costs 3 movement points, he's going to get a die roll modifier of 1 +1 for each movement point in excess of the 1. So if it costs 3 to move in there, that's 2 more than 1. So now he's going to take his UDD roll and he's going to have a +2 die roll modifier, right? And if you were to go to a second hex, it's going to be another +2. Plus there was a creek right there. That's even more. So that it will happen because there are some maps that are heavily wooded and you need to back away and you don't want to change your facing. So you got to keep that in mind when you start to do that, because you might disorder these guys and maybe it's a second disorder. Now you're losing strength points. But just remember that if you're in where it only costs 1 movement point to move into a hex, it's not a problem. All right. All right. So if a unit fails, it's disordered. If a disordered unit fails, it may not enter the second hex. It remains disordered in the first hex. So we were talking about if he was sitting here and we wanted to withdraw him into this hex and then over to this across the creek, if he rolled for UDD here and he failed, he can't move into that second hex. He's got to stay there, okay? If the first hex of withdrawal movement is adjacent to an enemy unit, the movement must cease. So if he was here, and there were units here and units here, okay? Or let's say the unit is here. Let's say this unit is over here, and he withdraws into that hex. He can't go another hex. He has to cease once he moves adjacent to that one. Because remember, moving into a zone of control stops all movement. All right. So the rest of the rules for this are optional for artillery. I think what we're going to do is we're going to stop here at 9.5, and when we come back, we only got one more section to go. So let's do reaction. Oh, and remember that too. When you do withdrawal movement, you're probably going to get fired at if somebody can. If somebody's in your frontal hex, they're going to shoot at you before you leave. All right. All right. So let's do reaction movement real quick. We'll talk about that. All right. So reaction movement is a non-phasing unit may move during an opponent's phase as reaction to what is happening. So you've got reaction refusal and facing change. A non-phasing combat unit may refuse or change facing in reaction to the movement by or fire from an enemy unit. Okay? So, he's sitting here on this hill. Billy Yank is sitting over here, and he's firing into his flank. Okay? Obviously, he's going to react to that. All right? Okay, so an enemy movement or advance into a hex adjacent to a non-phasing unit may trigger a refusal or facing change. Enemy fire from a hex outside the non-phasing combat unit's front may trigger a refusal or facing change. unless the non-phasing unit must retreat as a result of the fire. Okay? So Billy Yank shoots at him. He doesn't have to retreat. He's going to be able to turn. Of course, after he's fired at, because you're going to get that flank fire first, he'll have the option to turn so that he's not showing his butt to him. Or he'll have the option to do the refusal. So now he's covering all three of those hexes. Got it? Simple. All right. You can either face him after he's shot at, or you can do a refusal after he is shot at him. Okay. The other thing too is during movement. So if Billy Yank here, instead of firing, he moves into here, he will get the option to, once again, refusal or change his facing. Okay. That's simple. All right. Let's see. Unless the non-phasing unit must retreat as a fire, a unit may return fire after the refusal or facing change, unless it suffers a second disorder due to failing its UDD. All right. For firing after reaction refusal, follow the instructions 7.3. We've already been over that. All right. So, restrictions on the use of reaction refusal or facing. A unit may do so only once per enemy brigade activation. So this whole brigade's over here. Let's say this brigade is spread out over here. And this guy moves in here. And you're done moving him. And you decide to change his facing to here. Now this guy's from the same brigade. Now he moves in here. He can't do it again. All right? He cannot do it again. But if this brigade over here were activated, and then he moved in here like this, he could change the facing to meet that guy. But he can't do it for the same brigade but more than one time. And I'm assuming that's similar because that whole brigade is moving at the same time. So, or all the enemy is, all right? The unit undergoes a UDD when it does so. Infantry and cavalry only, not artillery. If it fails, it suffers a disorder result. Stacked units conduct separate UDDs. Okay. So after you've done your facing change or refusal, you got to do a UDD. All right. That cohesion stuff, the universal die roll, whatever it is, disruption die roll. And if you fail, it might be a second disorder, other things. Artillery doesn't have to. They don't have to do that. If it fails, it suffers a disorder result. Stacked units, so if you had a stack of Confederate units here, if you had 2 units, and then we're going to change facing, all right, each one would roll individually for the UDD after they've done their refusal or their facing change. Okay? There's no movement point cost to do that, as he's not a phasing unit. A unit may not use reactions if already in the frontal hex of another enemy unit. So, if he is sitting here, and let's get one, he is over here, and he is in this guy's frontal hex, and this unit moves in here, he can't change his facing because he's already engaged with that unit pretty much. So just remember, if you've got an enemy unit in one of your 2 frontal hexes and the opportunity comes up to refuse or change your facing because of another enemy unit, you cannot do it because you have a unit already in your front. All right? If artillery, it is subject to a minus DRM for any subsequent return fire or approach fire during the enemy brigade activation. So if you change the facing of an artillery unit as reaction fire, and then that artillery unit fires, he's going to get a minus 2 DRM. The artillery is, all right? Let's see, additional restrictions. They may change facing by only 1 vertex. All right, it means you can only turn him 1 vertex. And you may not do so if you're already refused. You can't change facing if you're refused, okay? So if you're already in this state here, you can't change facing, all right? Additional restrictions. The unit must be eligible to refuse. I'll go back to 731 and 732 for that. The unit must be capable of returning fire through its refused frontal hex. So, reaction refusal. I'm not even sure where that would apply. So, if you refuse this guy, he's got to be able to shoot into that hex. Oh, okay. So, if he were facing that way, and this guy moved into this hex, you can't, changing it, and there was nobody here, you can only move him, change his facing 1 hex. All right? or you can refuse him. You can't change and then refuse him. So if you refuse him, he's only able to fire into that hex. He's not able to fire into this one. So you cannot, for that movement right there where that unit came in behind him, you cannot refuse that unit because he won't be able to fire into that hex after refusing. Right? That's a little delicate rule that you probably, I know I probably won't catch on to it. All right. All right, moving in reaction. Mounted cavalry and artillery have the additional ability capable of moving in reaction to enemy movement within 3 hexes of their position. I'm not going to dig on that one, so it's simple. If this artillery battery is sitting right here, okay, and Johnny Reb is coming down here and he's in attack mode, and he moves to here, he's okay, but if he moves in within 3 hexes of this guy, 1, 2, 3, he has the option to fire. If he chooses to fire, he's not going anywhere. But he also has the ability to move away. All right? It's because they talk about it in some of the things how they got smarter about saving their artillery, not letting the infantry get in there too close with them. So they can move, and there's no movement cost. So they can move 1 or 2 hexes. I think artillery can move 1. Artillery may not reaction move into a hex that it would normally cost it more than 2 movement points. Let me see. March orders already in frontal hex of another enemy unit. Okay, if you're in the frontal hex, if there was an enemy unit here, so let's say he was here, and he moved into within 3 hexes, he can't run away because he's got a unit right there in his frontal hex. Same for cavalry. Artillery, I believe, artillery can move 1 hex away. Okay? Cavalry can move 2. All right? Well, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Units that are in march orders. Yeah, okay. So a mounted cavalry or artillery unit under march orders, or already in the frontal hex of an enemy. So if that artillery was with a command that's in march orders, or it was cavalry, mounted cavalry march orders, they can't do reaction movement. And if they're adjacent to an enemy unit, they cannot do reaction movement. An artillery unit moving in reaction may not use approach fire. All right, let's see. They can only do that. They can only reaction move once per enemy brigade activation. So if these two are sitting here, and the first guy moves, boom, and he decides to move. If this guy moves 1, 2, 3, he can't do it again to this guy. Okay, and if they've used reaction move, he can't do approach fire. So you got to think that one out with the artillery. Let's see. All right, and they can't. Artillery may not reaction move into a hex that would normally cost it more than 2 movement points to enter. And remember, artillery moving on a road's fine, but artillery moving through clear usually takes 2 movement points for them to move in a clear hex. Okay, so keep that in mind. They may use the road, pike, trail movement if eligible. Okay, so the unit must perform a UDD after the reaction move. Add to the roll the cavalry movement cost of any hex side crossed, plus that of each non-clear hex enter. So for cavalry, they're going to get a penalty if it's not a clear hex. All right. If the cavalry unit's strength is 4 strength points or less, and it is under advance orders, it may use the pike or road trail cost to calculate the UDD. All right. A failed UDD results in disorder. A second disorder results in the loss of a strength point or a gun. So if he withdraws, or he does reaction movement, and he's disordered, so if he's disordered, either one, it doesn't matter, and he reaction movements and he rolls his UDD and he fails, he's going to lose a gun. He's going to lose 1 strength point. All right? All right, so the decision to move in reaction is announced and implemented before the phasing unit moves to a hex in the triggering range. So Johnny, if he's sitting on this hill, right here, Johnny Reb's back here, and he goes 1, and he's getting ready to move into that hex that's within 3. Before he does it, this guy announces that he's going to withdraw. All right? Kind of, you're playing with yourself. It's not, you're going to just know, and you're just going to do it. All right? Let's see. All right. If mounted cavalry, the artillery chooses to move in reaction, the phasing unit can keep moving if it has movement points to do so. Let's see. Each hex artillery entries during reaction movement may not be closer to any enemy unit that is within 4 hexes of the artillery and has line of sight to it. That's kind of like your march thing. So if this unit's sitting over here, right, and he's sitting over here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I mean, he's getting ready to move into this hex, which is within 3, and he wants to move away. He cannot move closer. So this one's, he's 4 hexes away from him. He cannot move, well, that wouldn't be a good example. 1, 2, 3. Well, he can't move closer to an enemy unit that is within 4 hexes and line of sight. If this guy were below the hill, he wouldn't be able to see him. It wouldn't matter. He could go whatever way. All right. Yeah, I'm not even sure, because they're not going to be in that way anyhow. Oh, okay. I see what that's saying. So if he's sitting here for some reason, and, you know, he's been sitting there for a while, and he's been sitting there for a while, and this guy moves into that 3 hex, and you want a reaction with him, he's 2. You can't do that. You can't stay within that range of that guy. You've got to move away from him. So he'd have to go back that way. That's kind of weird. I don't know how often you run across that. You might. I got news for you. Most time, I mean, there are cases where I'll get my artillery out of there to save them. But most of the time, I've got infantry near my artillery, or maybe with it, and I want to fire that canister. So if I have infantry with it, I'm liable to leave the artillery right there. And that pretty much take care of reinforcements. You know, move your reinforcements in, come in on the roads. They're in march order. Make sure you do your stacking, use your extended columns, etc., etc., etc. All right, that takes care of section 9 on movement. Kind of hasty, but it would be the same as if you were trying to read the rules for your first time. That's the way I did it on this approach. We'll see how that turns out, and we'll get this posted. All right, guys. Thanks for watching this. If you want me to keep going with this stuff, give me a note in the comment. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe and hit that notify bell, and I'll keep after this stuff. All right, we'll get this posted shortly.